In the Amazon rainforest, a sloth hangs from its branch. For 20 hours, it hasn't moved a single finger. Eyes open, breathing, but completely motionless. This shouldn't be possible. Survival requires movement. Movement to find food, movement to escape danger. Nature doesn't forgive slowness. Motionlessness means extinction. Yet the sloth has reversed this rule, spending 2/3 of its life unconscious. Dr. Bryson Voirin from the Max Planck Institute describes this as a success that defies the rules of survival. Cheetahs sleep 12 hours to recover after explosive sprints. Lions rest 14 hours after eating prey. What about the sloth? It descends from the tree just once a week, only to use the bathroom, burns almost no energy, and stays motionless 20 hours a day. Tonight, we'll discover how the sloth's incredibly slow lifestyle has turned into a survival strategy. If this extraordinary slow lifestyle impressed you as much as it did me, like and subscribe. In the comments, write where you're watching from, what time it is there, and what surprised you most about sloths. You're the reason we keep discovering nature's secrets. Thank you for being here. First, let's note that researchers don't fully agree on the findings we'll be discussing. Some information is not definitive. Now let's discover how this slow-moving creature embraces its calm life. The sloth hangs from a branch 60 feet above the ground. It opens its eyes, blinks once, then closes them again. 20 minutes pass, an hour, 2 hours, but during this time the forest around this sleeping animal is alive with movement. Monkeys scream to defend their territory. Parrots break branches as they gather fruit. Rabbits hop quickly between trees. But the sloth? It doesn't move, it's silent. It breathes so slowly that you'd have to watch for minutes just to see its chest rise. We're looking at something that shouldn't exist. Think about the animals you know. Movement is critical for every animal. Lions hunt. Wolves patrol their territories. Even prey animals like deer stay alert to danger. Movement means survival in almost every ecological system we study. Energy spent on alertness pays off in maintaining existence. The sloth rejects this entire system. Sloths in the forest sleep only 10 hours a day. But here's where things change. They sleep 10 hours a day, but they spend most of their waking hours doing what we call active rest, meaning they don't sleep, but they're completely motionless with their eyes closed. When we add up these hours, you encounter an animal that appears unconscious for most of its day, nearly more than 20 hours. You've heard the myth that sloths sleep all day long. This myth was accepted for years, even by scientists, until brain monitoring devices revealed the truth. Researchers placed monitoring devices on sloths in the rainforest, and the results showed they only sleep 10 hours. That's 6 hours less than captive sloths' sleep time. But in the forest, perceptions can be deceiving. When a predator scans the branches, a motionless sloth looks just like a sleeping sloth. Neither moves, neither gets noticed. Now imagine trying this lifestyle. You eat breakfast, then stay completely motionless until dinner. No phone, no movement. While the world turns around you, you just lie there. Your metabolism would revolt, your muscles would waste away, your mind would crumble from lack of stimulation. For us, this approach would lead to serious health problems within weeks. For sloths, this is a survival form millions of years in the making. The secret is they use far less energy than our metabolism. Their metabolic rate is half of what's normal for their body weight. Think about that for a moment. You're sustaining your entire existence on less than half the fuel other animals need. Every process in your body operates at minimal speed. Every cellular process slowed down to spend minimum energy. This isn't inefficiency, this is a form of optimization we're only beginning to understand. Most mammals burn hundreds or thousands of calories daily. Let's compare with ourselves. We burn more than 1,500 calories a day. What about sloths? Thanks to their slow metabolism, their daily calorie needs are very low. Only 100 to 150 calories. That's less than a single chocolate bar. Less than what most people consume at breakfast. A sloth's entire day runs on what we consider a light snack. The fuel source explains part of this process. We're talking about leaves, not protein-rich meat, not calorie-dense fruits, just leaves. The nutritional value is equivalent to eating paper. Most leaves contain substances that mammalian digestive systems can't break down efficiently. The energy extraction process takes so long that some meals take a month to fully digest. Yes, you heard right. A month. In sloths, this process is even slower. The sloth's digestion rate is the lowest compared to other mammals. During this endless digestion process, the stomach can reach up to 35% of body weight. That's like a third of your body being your stomach. That's the reality for sloths. This creates a feeding cycle. Low nutritional value food requires slow digestion, which leads to limited energy supply. Limited energy requires little movement. Little movement enables survival on low nutritional value food. But here's what makes this situation truly strange. Sloths barely move at all. They only move when necessary, and even then they're very slow. On the ground, they move at 13 feet per minute, or 4 meters. That's about the length of a small vehicle. When they have to sprint because danger comes, they can reach up to 15 feet per minute, or 5 meters. We walk faster while checking our phones. You'd think this slowness would make them easy prey. Jaguars roam the forest floor, searching for prey. Harpy eagles have vision sharp enough to spot prey from hundreds of feet away. We talked about this in our previous video. Any of these predators should easily pluck sloths from branches because they sleep all day and stay motionless, right? But somehow, sloth populations continue to exist, somehow even taking just a few steps per minute. They manage to survive in a forest full of apex predators. So how is this possible? The first piece of this success puzzle is camouflage that goes beyond simple coloring. Sloth fur, unlike other mammals, grows backward from their legs and arms. This allows rain to flow easily off their bodies when hanging upside down from branches. The fur is also full of tiny grooves and cracks that trap moisture. This constantly moist environment allows organisms to settle in. Accordingly, the sloth's fur is full of various microorganisms and small creatures. But this is good for the sloth because predators that use vision, like predatory birds, often see the moss and fungi on sloths' bodies. These mosses give the fur a green tone, and predators become convinced this isn't prey. Imagine walking under a tree where a sloth lives. If you look up, your eyes don't immediately notice the green shape merged with branches and leaves. Even if you knew where to look, even if someone pointed directly at the animal, your brain processes this as vegetation. That's the deception protecting sloths from predators. But camouflage only works when you stay still. If you move, the illusion breaks. Predators lock onto movement. The slightest motion in the shadows triggers pursuit. Every prey species knows this. Rabbits freeze when hawks pass overhead. Deer stay motionless in thickets, but eventually they move. They have to. Life requires movement. Food, reproduction, territory maintenance, all happen through movement. No one stays motionless forever. But the sloth operates by different rules. When under threat, when a jaguar passes beneath its tree, when an eagle flies above, the sloth's way of responding isn't to run, it's to stop. Stop completely. They say a sloth won't respond even to very loud sounds. Because of this, some people think sloths might be deaf. But more likely, their response to threats simply involves not reacting. Why waste energy dealing with a sound when being unseen keeps you alive? So predators aren't blind. We talked about harpy eagles' impossible vision abilities in our previous journey. We know jaguars' movement tracking is excellent. But these vision and movement tracking abilities work for fast movements. Think of it like watching clouds drift across the sky. You know they're moving. If you watch long enough, you can see the movement. But your brain doesn't process this slow drift as direct movement. Sloths move like clouds. They change position at such a slow speed that predators' brains categorize them as inanimate, a branch swaying in the wind, or anything, not living flesh worth pursuing. But this extreme slowness creates an unexpected side effect. Most animals have rigid routines that structure their day: morning hunting, midday rest, evening socializing. Time organizes survival. For sloths, time works differently. So how do sloths spend their days? How does this slow movement philosophy shape their daily routines? Chapter 2. Watch a deer. It starts grazing at dawn, descends to water sources in the morning, midday rest in shade, evening feeding again, nighttime rest again. The same rhythm repeats throughout the week. This is a program optimized for survival. Now look at a sloth. It ignores all of this. Its daily routine is very simple. When observers researched sloths' daily routines, they saw their days were very empty. They usually do their feeding and moving in the early morning hours, between 7 and 8 o'clock. So what's the purpose of this? Energy conservation. Avoiding predators that hunt at different times. But here's what makes sloths' daily routines truly strange. They don't have daily routines in the sense we know them. If you watch a deer for a week, daily routine patterns emerge. What about sloths? Or they can be very inactive one day, much more active the next. No rhythmic, repeated movements. Activity levels are completely scattered. When we look at all this, it seems like they don't have a regular daily routine. Think about your own life. You wake up at roughly the same time every day. You eat your meals at roughly the same times. Your sleep follows a pattern. Even if conditions change, the underlying rhythm continues. When you eliminate this rhythm, life becomes chaotic and unsustainable. Yet sloths sustain their lives without the regular daily rhythm most mammals have. In sloths, feeding time starts around 7 in the morning. They move toward their preferred leaves, if you can call it movement. But the selection process is delicate. Not every leaf works. Sloths show great interest in young leaves. These preferences change according to the leaves' content and cover about 15 tree species. What's interesting is this: these leaf preferences pass from mother to offspring. The actual eating happens slowly. First, the leaf is plucked. It's chewed with minimum jaw movement for minimum energy expenditure. The food goes to the 4-chambered stomach, and the digestion process that will take weeks begins. Sloths spend 10 to 15 minutes a day feeding. This time includes finding food, selecting, chewing, everything. During these minutes, watchers from below see almost nothing. the sloth appears frozen, a green-brown shape that's become part of the branches. Change is only noticed when the animal's position is marked and returned to hours later. It has moved maybe 10 feet or 3 meters. Because of this, when a sloth finds a tree with leaves it likes, it stays there for a few days. When they have to change, they're forced to move and switch trees. But now we've come to the first big mystery in sloths' daily routines. There are two main species of sloths, three-toed ones and two-toed ones. These two species are distinctly different in appearance and behavior, and in routine as well. Three-toed sloths are mostly diurnal but can be active at any time of day when needed. But two-toed sloths are nocturnal, same forests, same trees, same predators. Yet these species developed opposite activity schedules. So what's the reason for this division? The obvious answer is avoiding competition. If both species were active at the same time, they'd compete for the same resources. Using different time periods makes coexistence possible, but still there's sometimes overlap. Both species can be active at any time of day. It's just a preference difference. So this explanation makes us think sloths are competing for limited resources, are they? But in rainforests, food doesn't run out. Young leaves emerge year-round thanks to non-synchronous tree growth patterns. There's no seasonal scarcity forcing competition. So maybe the day-night division isn't about food. Maybe it's about predators. Three-toed ones face the threat of harpy eagles during the day. Two-toed ones face jaguars at night. By choosing different time periods, each species aims to survive against their primary threats. But wait, we're looking at a diurnal three-toed feeding at 7 in the morning. Harpy eagles also hunt during the day. Shouldn't the sloth be motionless during the hours when eagles are most active? Here's where the strategy's subtlety lies. Eagles are visual hunters. They need light to spot prey from high up. Early morning light is bright enough to see leaves filtering through the canopy layers, but not efficient for eagles' movement detection. When full daylight comes around 9, the sloth has finished feeding and moved to motionlessness. The math checks out, but only if you ignore the data showing that sloths don't have consistent schedules. Some days they feed at dawn, some days at noon, some days they don't seem to feed at all. It's surprising that individual sloths within the same population show such different activity levels. Normally, in an animal population, individuals follow one another. When deer are in a herd, they feed at the same time, rest at the same time. They follow each other. How deer maintain this coordination even when under threat is truly fascinating. When one deer notices danger, the information spreads through the herd with remarkable precision. On our next journey, we'll examine how the warning system deer developed against predators works. Now let's get back to sloths. Yes, this synchronization that exists in deer doesn't exist in sloths. This creates a predator avoidance strategy no one predicted. If your activity schedule is random, predators can't predict when you'll be vulnerable. Eagles can't wait for a specific sloth's feeding time because that sloth doesn't have a feeding time. The inconsistency that looks like weakness becomes protection. Then midnight comes. The three-toed sloth that fed at dawn has been motionless for 14 hours. Digestion proceeds at bacterial speed. Body temperature drops in the coolest part of night and is allowed to vary across a range too wide for other mammals to withstand for energy conservation. Meanwhile, 30 meters away, a two-toed sloth wakes from its daytime sleep and begins moving in darkness. Two-toed sloths, despite being camouflage masters, have developed additional defensive abilities. They have relatively stronger limbs, and if a predator gets too close, they can swipe with their sharp claws. Yes, that's right. Nocturnal life requires different defenses. When predators hunt by scent and sound, you can't rely on visual camouflage alone. Accordingly, two-toed ones have developed such an adaptation. They can't win a fight with jaguars, but they make the attack difficult enough. Accordingly, predators often choose easier prey. The nocturnal two-toed sloth moves faster than its diurnal cousin. Not fast by normal standards, of course. We're still talking about feet, meters per minute, but noticeably faster. Their diet is more varied. Besides leaves, it includes fruits and occasionally insects. This mixed feeding requires covering more area to find different food sources. Accordingly, two-toed sloths tend to cover more area over time, but not time. Temperature guides activity more. When nights are cold, sloths become more active to generate metabolic heat. When days are cold, nighttime activity increases because the day was spent warming up instead of feeding. The schedule shapes entirely according to temperature, not hours. This creates days when sloths don't eat. On these days, they don't move. They just hang there for 24 hours. They digest the previous day's leaves and conserve every calorie. To observers, these animals look dead. Breathing is invisible, no position change. A stillness continues beyond sleep, resembling a suspended state. But inside, bacterial digestion continues. Sloths live in a condition most mammals would consider abnormal and accept it as normal. The question occupying researchers is this: how do these animals coordinate anything? For mating, two sloths need to be in the same tree. But if neither has a routine, how does timing work? Female three-toed sloths in mating season scream, literally screaming loudly across the canopy. Males move toward this sound, eventually, over days. So even reproduction in sloths is slow. The sense of urgency carries an almost completely different meaning in these animals. Think about this. Most mammals have breeding seasons. These are specific months when conditions best ensure offspring survival. Sloths reproduce year-round. They have no special season. There's no coordination except the females call and males eventually coming. The lack of regular routine is reflected even in reproduction. Processes other animals complete quickly are stretched to weeks and months in sloths because of their low metabolism. The animal we're seeing is among the rare creatures that can stay outside the 24-hour cycle that guides most life on Earth. Of course, it has some repeating tendencies. Depending on its species, it may show a slight tendency toward day or night hours. But this rhythm is extremely weak, and these tendencies are easily crushed under the pressure of temperature, predator risk, food abundance. The sloth is part of the forest's rhythm but doesn't fully conform to time's patterns like most creatures around it. It lives within time but doesn't follow time the way we understand it. We've understood how deep this strategy goes. Sloths have no activity patterns, no routines, only decisions made according to momentary conditions. And this is a system that works perfectly on land. But sloths don't just live on land, they regularly descend into water, and their everything changes. Chapter 3. The sloth releases its grip. 4 claws uncurl from bark. Body weight shifts forward, then gravity takes over and the animal plummets toward water 30 feet below. No hesitation. No testing the distance. Just commitment to a fall that would injure most mammals its size. Impact. The sloth disappears beneath brown river water churned by recent rain. Seconds pass, 10, 20, 30. No bubbles rise, no thrashing disturbs the surface. Just stillness that extends so long you'd assume the animal drowned on entry. Then a head emerges, calm, unhurried. The sloth floats there, body horizontal at the waterline, looking more relaxed than it ever does in trees. And we're watching something that shouldn't make sense. This is an animal built for hanging, an animal whose entire morphology optimizes vertical suspension from branches, long arms, curved claws, muscle arrangement designed for pulling rather than pushing. Every physical trait screams arboreal specialist, yet here it is, swimming. Not just surviving in water, but moving with efficiency that contradicts everything we know about sloth locomotion. On land, this animal covers 13 feet per minute. A pace so slow it becomes a punchline. But in water, triple that speed, 44 feet per minute, half a mile per hour. Still not fast by most standards, you could easily outwalk a swimming sloth, but representing a 300% increase in velocity. Think about that transformation. Imagine if stepping into water allowed you to suddenly sprint 3 times faster than your normal running speed. Your entire relationship with movement would change. Swimming wouldn't be exercise, it would be liberation. And for sloths navigating rainforest rivers and flooded forest floors, water represents exactly that kind of freedom. The physics explains part of this paradox. Water provides buoyancy that gravity denies. On land, every ounce of body weight presses down through limbs designed for hanging, not supporting. The awkward dragging locomotion we see when sloths cross ground reflects biomechanical constraints imposed by their specialized anatomy. But submerge that same body and buoyancy counteracts weight. The sloth no longer fights against its own mass. Instead, it floats naturally, that enormous stomach filled with slowly fermenting leaves acting like an internal flotation device. Those long arms that seem cumbersome on horizontal surfaces become perfect paddles. The sloth employs a motion researchers describe as doggy paddle, but that more accurately resembles a leisurely breaststroke. Front limbs extend forward, pull back through water, generate thrust. Rear limbs kick side to side, providing additional propulsion and steering. The entire sequence flows with coordination we never see during terrestrial movement. Watch a sloth swim and grace appears. That's the word field researchers keep using. Grace. An animal that looks perpetually awkward in its natural canopy habitat, somehow achieves fluid motion in an environment it didn't evolve for. The contrast suggests we've fundamentally misunderstood something about sloth biomechanics. Maybe those muscles aren't weak. Maybe they're optimized for specific movement patterns we rarely observe because sloths rarely need to employ them. But speed is just the surface mystery, literally because this swimming sloth hasn't surfaced to breathe in 5 minutes, then 10, then 15, and we're still waiting for the respiratory urgency that drives most mammals to gasp for air within seconds of submersion. Humans start experiencing carbon dioxide buildup around 60 seconds underwater. Panic follows shortly after. Even trained freedivers pushing human limits tap out around 5 or 6 minutes. Marine mammals do better. Dolphins manage 10 to 15 minutes between breaths, but they've spent millions of years evolving specifically for aquatic life. Sloths, they're tree specialists who occasionally get wet. Yet somehow, they're outlasting dolphins by a factor of 3. 40 minutes, that's the recorded maximum. 40 minutes without a single breath. 40 minutes where oxygen intake equals 0 and the animal continues functioning normally. To achieve this, sloths employ a physiological trick so extreme it borders on hibernation. They slow their heart rate, not slightly, not by 10 or 20%, by up to 2/3. A resting sloth heart beats slowly already, somewhere around 40 to 60 beats per minute, depending on temperature and activity. Submerge that sloth and the heart rate drops to 15 or 20 beats per minute, sometimes lower. This is voluntary bradycardia pushed to limits we don't see in other mammals. Seals do something similar during deep dives. Whales drop their heart rates when descending. But those are animals whose entire circulatory systems evolved around extended submersion. Sloths evolved for life in trees where water represents occasional obstacle rather than primary habitat. Yet they've developed breath-holding capabilities that exceed most dedicated aquatic species. The metabolic math makes this possible. Remember, sloths operate on 100 to 150 calories daily. That's not just external energy intake. That's total system throughput. Every cellular process runs on a fraction of the fuel other mammals require. Breathing isn't exempt from this efficiency. Most mammals breathe 12 to 20 times per minute at rest. Sloths, 6 to 8 breaths per minute. Some recorded observations show sloth ventilation dropping even lower during deep rest. This reduced respiratory rate connects directly to that extraordinarily slow metabolism. You don't need to cycle oxygen through your system rapidly if your system isn't burning oxygen rapidly. And when you combine baseline metabolic slowness with voluntary heart rate reduction, you get an animal that can effectively enter low power mode at will. Oxygen consumption drops by 2/3. The existing oxygen in lungs and bloodstream lasts 3 times longer. 40 minutes becomes achievable without requiring any structural changes to lung capacity or blood chemistry. But here's the detail that reveals how deeply this adaptation runs. Sloth lungs aren't even firmly attached. Most mammal lungs connect to the ribcage through tight ligaments that hold them in place. This anchoring prevents lung collapse and ensures consistent inflation during breathing cycles. Sloths have loose lung attachments. Their lungs float somewhat freely within the chest cavity, held by specialized ligaments that allow significant movement. This loose arrangement serves 2 purposes. First, it prevents lung compression when hanging upside down for hours. Normal lung attachments would cause gravitational stress in inverted positions. Loose attachments allow lungs to maintain proper position regardless of body orientation. Second, during submersion, these loose lungs can compress more easily. Water pressure squeezes the chest cavity. Rigid lung attachments would fight that compression, requiring muscular effort to maintain inflation. Loose attachments let lungs compress naturally, reducing the work required to stay underwater. The result is an animal physiologically prepared for extended submersion despite having no evolutionary history as an aquatic species. Which raises the obvious question, why develop these capabilities? Rainforest rivers aren't that wide. A sloth could simply avoid water entirely, staying in continuous canopy and never descend it to cross streams. Many arboreal species do exactly that. So why did sloths invest in swimming proficiency? The answer lies in rainforest geography and sloth territorial needs. Central and South American rainforests are wet, not just during rainy season, year-round wet. Rivers meander through forest. Streams appear after storms. Seasonal floods transform forest floors into temporary lakes. An arboreal animal avoiding water entirely would find its range severely restricted. Trees grow near water, sometimes in water. A sloth that can't swim can't access trees growing on the opposite bank, can't cross flooded areas during wet season, can't escape rising water during severe floods. Swimming isn't recreational for sloths, it's navigational. They swim to expand territory, to access better feeding trees, to find mates when reproductive opportunity presents itself. Male sloths searching for females in estrus might need to cross multiple waterways. Females establishing territories for offspring need access to resource-rich areas that might require river crossings. Swimming transforms isolated tree clusters into connected habitat. The 40-minute breath hold adds a layer of predator avoidance we didn't anticipate. Anacondas hunt in rivers. Caimans lurk near riverbanks. Both predators rely on detecting surfacing prey. An animal that needs to breathe every few minutes creates predictable vulnerability windows, but a sloth can submerge and stay down long enough to travel substantial distances underwater, long enough that predators scanning for surfacing mammals miss them entirely. The same stillness that protects sloths in trees protects them underwater. They become invisible through absence of detectable breathing patterns. And there's evidence suggesting sloths use water as escape routes during terrestrial predator encounters. A jaguar cornering a sloth near a river might watch its prey drop into water and disappear. The jaguar, despite being a capable swimmer, can't stay underwater hunting. After 2 or 3 minutes, any pursuit becomes futile. The sloth could be 50 meters downstream, still submerged, still moving, completely beyond detection. By the time the sloth surfaces, the jaguar has given up and moved on. This creates a survival strategy layered across multiple domains. In trees, slowness plus camouflage equals invisibility. On ground, vulnerability necessitates minimal time spent terrestrial. In water, speed plus extended submersion equals escape capability. Sloths aren't optimized for any single environment. They're optimized for navigating the interface between environments using contradictory strategies that somehow coalesce into functional survival. Watch that swimming sloth resurface after 15 minutes, submerged. No gasping, no desperate gulping of air. Just calm resumption of surface breathing at that same 6 to 8 breaths per minute baseline. The cardiovascular system ramps back up gradually. Heart rate increases from 15 to 40 beats per minute over several minutes, rather than spiking immediately. This controlled recovery prevents the oxygen debt that causes distress in mammals who hold their breath too long. The sloth reaches the far bank. Those long arms extend forward, claws dig into mud, and the laborious process of climbing begins. Back into slowness, back into the terrestrial vulnerability that makes every ground-level moment dangerous. But for those 15 or 20 minutes in water, we witnessed something that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of morphological constraints. We watched an animal built for one lifestyle excel temporarily at another lifestyle using adaptations that serve double duty across contexts. And here's what keeps researchers questioning their assumptions. Sloths don't practice swimming, they don't train. Juvenile sloths don't take swimming lessons from parents, they just know. Drop a sloth into water and it immediately employs efficient swimming technique and breath-holding strategy. The behavior is hardwired, genetically encoded. which means these aquatic capabilities aren't recent adaptations. They're ancient, preserved across millions of years, despite the fact that most individual sloths might only swim a handful of times across their entire lifespan. That preservation suggests swimming matters more than frequency implies. That occasional river crossing or flood escape makes the difference between population survival and extinction. Natural selection doesn't maintain expensive traits unless they pay for themselves in reproductive success. And make no mistake, being able to hold your breath for 40 minutes while your heart rate drops by 2/3 is expensive. It requires precise coordination between respiratory, cardiovascular, and nervous systems. It requires metabolic flexibility most mammals simply don't possess. The sloth reaches the bank and quietly returns to the trees, its movements settling back into their usual, unhurried pace. Swimming is only one of the unusual behaviors that shape its daily life. Another occurs not in water but on the ground, a routine that happens just once a week and changes the animal's body in a noticeable way. Chapter 4. 7 days have passed since the sloth last descended. 7 days of leaves consumed and slowly digested. 7 days of waste accumulating in that 4-chambered stomach system. The animal hangs from its usual branch, motionless as always, but something shifts. An internal signal we don't fully understand triggers preparation for the journey down. This is not hunger, not thirst, not any drive related to acquiring resources. This is elimination, the simple biological necessity of removing what the body cannot use. For most mammals, this process happens multiple times daily without ceremony or risk. For the sloth, it becomes a weekly ritual that consumes 8% of daily energy and carries a 50% mortality rate. Think about those numbers for a moment. 8% of your daily energy budget spent on a bathroom trip. That would be like walking 2 miles just to use a toilet. And 50% mortality means half of all sloths die during or immediately after defecation, not from disease, not from old age, from predation while vulnerable on the ground, performing a basic bodily function, yet they do it anyway, every week, without fail. 3-toed sloths will not defecate from the canopy despite the obvious advantages of simply letting waste fall. They descend, always. The behavior is hardwired to a degree that suggests powerful selection pressure maintained it across evolutionary time. The descent begins in late afternoon. The sloth uncurls from its resting position, extends one arm downward, finds purchase on lower bark, and begins the slow crawl toward ground level. This journey that would take a monkey 30 seconds stretches into a 15-minute ordeal. Each movement deliberate, each grip tested before committing weight. The claws that work perfectly for hanging become clumsy tools for downward climbing. Temperature drops as the sloth moves through canopy layers. 60 feet up, air temperature might reach 85 degrees in afternoon sun. At ground level, shade and moisture reduce that to 75 degrees. For an animal whose body temperature fluctuates with surroundings, this 10-degree drop matters. Metabolic processes slow further, movement becomes even more labored, but the drive to reach ground overrides thermal comfort. Finally, the forest floor, leaf litter, damp soil, a completely different sensory environment than canopy existence. The sloth pauses here, seemingly assessing surroundings. Those weak eyes scan for movement. That poor hearing strains for sounds indicating nearby predators. The sloth cannot run, cannot fight effectively, can only hope this particular moment in this particular location doesn't coincide with a hunting jaguar. Then the dance begins. Researchers call it the poo dance, and the name is accurate. The sloth rotates its hindquarters left, then right, then left again. A rhythmic wiggle that looks almost comical given the animal's usual immobility. Three-toed sloths use their short tails to dig while wiggling. Two-toed sloths press their entire pelvic region into the soil. Either way, a shallow depression forms. A hole may be 2 inches deep and 4 inches across. The purpose of this wiggling remains unclear. Does it stimulate bowel movements? Does it simply prepare the defecation site? No one knows for certain. But every sloth performs the dance. The consistency suggests function beyond random behavior. Some scientists suspect the wiggling helps position the body for maximum efficiency during the elimination process itself. What happens next is dramatic. The sloth's entire abdominal region contracts. You can watch the stomach physically shrink as waste moves through the digestive tract. One push. Everything merges in a single movement, no straining, no multiple attempts. Just one coordinated expulsion of accumulated waste. The volume is staggering. Sloths can lose up to 1/3 of their body weight during defecation. 1/3? A 10-pound sloth releases over 3 pounds of feces. A human equivalent would be a 150-pound person producing a 50-pound bowel movement. The comparison becomes almost absurd, but the proportions are accurate. This massive volume results from that week-long accumulation period. Normal mammals defecate when waste reaches a certain threshold. Sloths wait 7 days regardless of threshold. By day 7, the digestive system is effectively backed up. The stomach, already enormous relative to body size, swells to hold both fresh food and processed waste. That 37% of body mass occupied by stomach contents includes significant fecal matter waiting for the weekly release. After elimination, the sloth performs another brief wiggle, spreading leaf litter and soil over the pile. Then the long climb back begins. This ascent proves even more difficult than descent. The animal is lighter, significantly lighter, but also depleted. That 8% daily energy expenditure just got consumed. The sloth must now climb 60 feet while running on fumes. Predation risk peaks during this climb. The sloth moves slowly even by sloth standards. Any jaguar or ocelot in the area would find easy prey in this exhausted, ascending animal. Over 50% of documented sloth deaths occur during or shortly after ground defecation. The same tree base often shows evidence of multiple defecation sites alongside signs of predator kills. Sloths return to the same spots repeatedly, and predators learn these patterns. So why take the risk? If waste elimination is necessary, why not simply release it from the canopy like howler monkeys and countless other arboreal species do? The energy savings would be substantial, the mortality risk would drop to near zero. Yet three-toed sloths never defecate from height. The behavior persists despite obvious costs. One popular theory involves sloth moths. These specialized insects live exclusively in sloth fur. When a sloth descends to defecate, female moths crawl off the animal and lay eggs in the fresh feces. Larvae feed on the decomposing plant matter, develop into adult moths, then fly back into the canopy, searching for new sloth hosts. The cycle depends entirely on ground defecation. Researchers initially thought sloths descended specifically to maintain this moth population. The moths, in turn, contribute nitrogen to the fur ecosystem, promoting algae growth. Algae provides camouflage and potentially supplemental nutrients if absorbed through skin or ingested during grooming. The entire system forms an elegant three-way symbiosis. Sloth provides transportation and feces, moths provide nutrients, algae provides camouflage. But this explanation has problems. Captive sloths without moths or algae remain perfectly healthy. Blood analysis shows no nutritional differences between algae-covered wild sloths and clean captive sloths. Furthermore, no one has ever documented a sloth eating algae from its own fur. If the nutrient benefit is minimal or non-existent, why risk death to maintain moth populations? A competing theory suggests communication. Feces and urine contain pheromones that convey information about individual identity, reproductive status, and health. By depositing waste at ground level in specific locations, sloths create chemical signposts. Other sloths passing through the area can read these signals without visual or vocal contact. For solitary animals with poor hearing and vision, chemical communication might be the most reliable method of coordinating territories and mating opportunities. Supporting this hypothesis, female sloths in estrus descend to defecate daily rather than weekly. This sudden increase in ground visits coincides with peak fertility. The extra trips make sense if the goal involves broadcasting availability to males. By depositing pheromone-rich waste multiple times per week, females essentially advertise their reproductive window across a larger area. Male sloths seeking mates would check these traditional defecation sites, detect female pheromones, and follow chemical trails to locate receptive females. The system works without requiring complex vocalizations or visual displays, just chemistry and patience. Exactly what you'd expect from animals who conserve energy to extremes. A third explanation involves tree fertilization. Sloths typically defecate at the base of their primary feeding trees. By returning waste to the same trees they feed from, they might be closing a nutrient loop. The decomposing feces releases nitrogen and other compounds back into soil, promoting leaf growth in those specific trees. Over years, a sloth's preferred trees receive regular fertilization, while neighboring trees do not. This behavior would represent remarkable ecological sophistication. The sloth isn't just eliminating waste, it's maintaining its own food supply through deliberate nutrient cycling. The energy and risk investments in ground defecation pay dividends in improved leaf quality and abundance. The sloth becomes a gardener of sorts, cultivating the very trees it depends on for survival. All three theories might contain partial truth. Communication and fertilization and moth relationships could all contribute to maintaining ground defecation behavior. Evolution rarely optimizes for single purposes. More likely, multiple selective pressures combine to preserve this risky weekly ritual, despite its obvious costs. What we can observe clearly the relief. Researchers watching sloths defecate describe visible expressions of satisfaction. The animals tip their heads back. Their permanent smiles seem more pronounced. They sit motionless for several minutes after elimination, apparently enjoying the sensation of reduced body weight and internal pressure. For animals that never hurry, these post-defecation moments represent peak tranquility. Then reality returns. The sloth must climb, must regain the safety of canopy height before darkness brings nocturnal predators. The ascent takes 20 minutes, 30, sometimes longer, if the animal pauses frequently to rest. By the time the sloth reaches its usual branch height, dusk has arrived. Another weekly ritual complete. Another 7 days before the next descent. Another week of accumulation and patient waiting for the internal signal that triggers the whole cycle again. This bathroom routine, strange as it seems to us, works. Sloth populations persist across Central and South American rainforests. The weekly defecation pattern survived millions of years of evolutionary pressure. If the costs truly outweighed benefits, natural selection would have eliminated the behavior. Two-toed sloths don't descend for defecation. They release waste from the canopy, which proves ground defecation isn't mandatory for sloth survival. Yet three-toed sloths maintain the tradition. Keep descending, keep risking predation, keep investing 8% of daily energy into a process that could be accomplished with zero risk and minimal effort. The behavior's persistence suggests we're missing something important, some benefit we haven't identified, some reason that makes the weekly ground ritual worth dying for. Until we understand that reason, the sloth's bathroom habits remain one of those beautiful mysteries that nature occasionally provides, a reminder that even the simplest behaviors can hide complex purposes we're only beginning to grasp. Chapter 5. Look closely at a sloth hanging in afternoon light, that brown fur catching sun through canopy gaps, except it's not exactly brown, is it? There's green mixed in, patches of it, sometimes covering the entire coat in a shade that makes the animal disappear against leaves and moss. Get closer, though in the wild you rarely would, and you'd see the green isn't paint or stain. It's alive, growing, moving slowly through the fur like a garden spreading across skin. Sloth hair is different from other mammal hair. Under a microscope, each strand shows something unusual, cracks running along its length. Not damage, not weakness, just grooves carved into the hair structure itself. These micro cracks trap moisture. Water beads along them, settles into the valleys and stays there. In rainforest humidity, the trapped water never fully evaporates. The hair becomes permanently damp. And in dampness, things grow. Algae arrive first, microscopic, floating through air as spores or transferred from tree bark during those long resting periods when sloths press against branches. The spores settle into the hair cracks, find moisture, find shelter from direct sun, begin photosynthesizing. One cell becomes two, two becomes four. Within weeks, a single hair hosts thousands of algal cells. Within months, the entire coat takes on that characteristic greenish tint. The algae species living here exists nowhere else on Earth. Scientists call it Trichophilus welkeri, a specialized organism that evolved specifically to inhabit sloth fur. Mothers pass it to babies during those first weeks of clinging contact. The algae transfers from generation to generation, maintaining a partnership that likely extends back millions of years. We're looking at coevolution in its purest form. Sloth hair structure shaped by algae needs, algae biology shaped by sloth habitat. But the ecosystem doesn't stop with algae. Fungi appear next. They colonize the same cracks, often growing alongside algal colonies. The relationship between fungi and algae here mirrors relationships we see in lichens, different organisms sharing space, each contributing something the other needs. Some fungal strains found in sloth fur show antibiotic properties. Early research suggests these fungi might protect sloths from certain parasites and diseases. They might even have medical applications for humans, though that research remains preliminary. Then come the insects, moths primarily. Small pyralid moths in the genus Cryptoses. They live their entire adult lives in sloth fur, hundreds of them sometimes. One study documented over 120 moths living on a single three-toed sloth. These aren't parasites. They don't feed on the sloth. They don't bite or damage the host. They simply exist there, crawling through fur, mating in the same hair where they were born, completing a life cycle that depends entirely on sloth behavior. The moths wait for that weekly descent. When the sloth climbs down to defecate, female moths crawl out of the fur and onto the fresh feces. They lay eggs there, dozens of eggs deposited in a pile of decomposing plant matter. The eggs hatch into larvae that feed on the sloth dung, nothing else, just that one food source. The larvae grow, pupatae, emerge as adult moths, then fly back up into the canopy, searching for sloth fur to colonize. The entire cycle takes several weeks. The timing needs to be precise. If a sloth doesn't return to the same defecation site, if weather conditions destroy the feces pile, if predators disturb the area, the moth life cycle fails. This explains part of why three-toed sloths return to the same spots repeatedly. They're not just marking territory, they're maintaining moth habitat, creating reliable nursery sites where the next generation of fur residents can develop. It's ecosystem management happening unconsciously. The sloth doesn't know it's helping moths. The behavior simply persists because individuals with more fur moths possibly received some benefit that aided survival or reproduction. What benefit? That question occupied researchers for years. Moths living in fur seemed like harmless hitchhikers, tolerated but not beneficial. But closer examination revealed something interesting. Dead moths decompose in the fur. Their bodies break down into nitrogen compounds. That nitrogen enriches the fur microenvironment. Higher nitrogen levels promote algae growth. More algae means better camouflage. It also means potential supplemental nutrition if sloths actually consume fur algae during grooming. The algae itself is surprisingly nutritious. Laboratory analysis shows it contains lipids, fats, in concentrations that exceed most plant matter in sloth diets. Leaves provide few calories, they're mostly cellulose and water. But algae packs concentrated energy. If sloths regularly ingest even small amounts of fur algae, they'd gain access to calories unavailable through normal feeding. This could explain how sloths survive on such minimal food intake. The catch: we've never definitively observed sloths eating their own fur algae. Researchers have watched sloths for thousands of hours. They've documented feeding, grooming, mating. But nobody has recorded clear evidence of deliberate algae consumption. Maybe it happens during self-grooming in ways too subtle to catch. Maybe sloths ingest algae accidentally while licking their young. Maybe the benefit is overestimated. The question remains open. Beetles also inhabit sloth fur, though in much smaller numbers than moths. Scarab beetles primarily. They feed on skin flakes and other organic debris that accumulates in the coat. Their role appears similar to cleanup crew in larger ecosystems. They process waste material that might otherwise attract harmful bacteria or fungi. By removing this debris, beetles might help maintain fur health and reduce disease risk. The full inventory of sloth fur residents includes mites, ticks, and various other arthropods. Some are parasites, some are commensals, neither helping nor harming. Some might serve functions we haven't identified yet. The ecosystem contains multiple trophic levels: primary producers like algae, primary consumers like mites feeding on algae, secondary consumers like predatory mites feeding on other mites. It's a functioning food web operating entirely within the coat of a single mammal. Sloths tolerate this. They don't scratch excessively, don't attempt to remove their residents through grooming. Their immune systems don't treat the fur ecosystem as infection requiring clearance. Instead, they've evolved alongside these organisms to the point where the partnership seems neutral or beneficial to both sides. The sloth provides habitat and transportation. The residents provide camouflage and possibly nutrition. Everyone benefits from the arrangement. The camouflage effect is substantial. That greenish tint breaks up the sloth's outline against foliage. Predators scanning the canopy look for mammal-shaped objects, brown shapes, movement. But a green sloth hanging motionless blends into the background noise of leaves and moss. The algae coat transforms the animal's visual signature from prey to vegetation. This probably saves lives. Eagles hunting by sight pass over algae-covered sloths they might otherwise detect. Smell works similarly. Sloths produce almost no body odor. Their fur ecosystem generates plant smells instead. The decomposing algae, the fungal colonies. The overall scent profile resembles tree bark and moss rather than mammal. Predators hunting by scent likely miss sloths simply because the chemical signals say plant, not meat. The camouflage operates across multiple sensory channels simultaneously. Temperature regulation might benefit from the fur ecosystem too. Algae-filled hair retains moisture differently than clean hair. The moisture content affects insulation properties. Whether this helps or hinders thermoregulation remains unclear, but given how precisely sloths must manage body temperature, any effect matters. Even small changes in how fur holds heat could impact survival during cool nights. The ecosystem isn't static. It changes with seasons, with age, with health status. Young sloths have less algae than adults. Sick sloths show different fungal profiles than healthy ones. Sloths living in drier regions have sparser fur ecosystems than those in perpetually humid areas. The composition shifts based on environmental conditions and individual circumstances. Two-toed and three-toed sloths host different ecosystems despite living in the same forests. Three-toed sloths have more moths and denser algae growth. Two-toed sloths have fewer moths but more diverse bacterial communities. The differences reflect their separate evolutionary histories. These two sloth lineages diverged 20 million years ago. Their fur ecosystems diverged alongside them, each optimizing for slightly different environmental pressures and behavioral patterns. Losing the ecosystem would impact sloths noticeably. Captive sloths kept clean show no health problems, which proves the fur residents aren't strictly necessary for survival. But wild sloths without their ecosystem would be more visible to predators, more detectable by scent, possibly lacking supplemental nutrition that helps them through lean periods. The partnership might not be obligate, but it's certainly beneficial under natural conditions. We're watching a mobile ecosystem, a traveling garden, an animal that functions simultaneously as habitat and inhabitant. The sloth provides the space, the residents provide services. Together they create something neither could achieve alone. It's mutualism operating at microscopic scales, invisible to casual observers, but fundamental to how these animals navigate their world. And it all starts with hair structure. Those micro cracks that trap moisture. That single evolutionary innovation that allowed algae colonization. From there, the ecosystem built itself through millions of years of gradual addition. Fungi arriving, moths specializing, beetles adapting, layer upon layer of biological relationships stacking into complexity we're still mapping. Every sloth carries a universe in its fur, a complete biological system operating silently while the animal hangs motionless in afternoon light, looking for all the world like just another patch of moss-covered bark. Chapter 6. 37 million years ago, something resembling a sloth appeared in South American forests. Not quite what we'd recognize today. Larger, ground-dwelling, moving through undergrowth rather than canopy. But the basic body plan was there. Long limbs, curved claws, slow metabolism optimized for leaf consumption. The ancestor that would eventually split into dozens of different forms. Time passed, climates shifted, ice ages came and went, and sloths diversified. Some stayed small, some grew larger, a few became truly massive. By the time humans arrived in the Americas, over 100 different sloth species existed. They occupied deserts, mountains, grasslands, tropical forests, cold regions, near glaciers. Almost every available habitat hosted at least one sloth species. The largest among them was Megatherium. The name translates simply as great beast, and the description fits. These animals stood 12 feet tall on hind legs, weighed 4 tons, the same mass as a full-grown elephant. Their claws measured 7 inches long. Bodies covered in thick fur adapted for cooler climates that dominated South America during ice ages. Imagine encountering one. You're walking through Pleistocene grassland and spot movement ahead, something brown, massive, rising up on rear legs to reach tree branches 20 feet above ground. Those enormous claws pull down entire limbs. The head seems small for the body, narrow mouth, peg-like teeth designed for grinding leaves rather than tearing meat. The animal moves with deliberate slowness, each step calculated, conserving energy even at this massive scale. Megatherium didn't run, couldn't run. The skeleton shows this clearly: thick bones, heavy joints, a body plan optimized for strength rather than speed. When threatened, these animals likely reared up on hind legs and used those massive claws for defense. A single swipe could disembowel a predator. Most carnivores simply avoided them. Why risk injury attacking something this large and well-armed? Life for Megatherium revolved around eating and resting, the same basic pattern modern sloths follow, just scaled up dramatically. They consumed massive quantities of vegetation daily, leaves, twigs, fruits when available. That 4-ton body required fuel, though their slow metabolism meant they needed less than you'd expect for their size. Still, feeding occupied much of their waking time. They lived in groups sometimes. Fossil sites show multiple individuals together. Whether these represented family units or just temporary gatherings around good food sources remains unclear. But the social tolerance existed. These weren't solitary animals defending territories aggressively. More likely, they simply coexisted peacefully wherever food grew abundantly. Other giant ground sloths filled different niches. Megalodon lived farther south in cooler regions. Fossil evidence shows it had thick fur and possibly bony plates embedded in skin for protection. Megalonyx ranged across North America after the continents connected. Smaller than Megatherium, only 8 to 10 feet long, maybe 800 pounds. but still formidable compared to modern animals. Some ground sloths specialized for specific habitats. Desert species adapted to arid conditions. Mountain species developed thick coats for high altitudes. One lineage even took to coastal areas, feeding on seagrass in shallow waters. Marine sloths. The diversity was remarkable. Sloths had found ways to survive almost everywhere in the Americas, but not all sloths stayed on the ground. Some lineages moved into trees, started small, developed adaptations for climbing. Their size decreased naturally. Branches can only support so much weight. A 4-ton sloth couldn't navigate canopy safely, but a 10-pound sloth could live there permanently, accessing food sources ground-dwelling species couldn't reach. These tree-dwelling sloths faced different selective pressures than their ground-dwelling relatives. Predators were still a concern, but escape strategies changed. Ground sloths relied on size and claws for defense. Tree sloths relied on camouflage and stillness. The survival strategies diverged. The animals diverged alongside them. Modern two-toed and three-toed sloths represent separate evolutionary experiments. They didn't evolve from each other. Both descended independently from different ground sloth ancestors. Two-toed sloths are more closely related to extinct Mylodon than to three-toed sloths. Three-toed sloths are actually nested within a family that includes Megatherium. Yes, that tiny three-toed sloth hanging in Costa Rican forests shares closer ancestry with elephant-sized giants than with the two-toed sloth in the neighboring tree. This reveals something fascinating about evolution. Similar environments produce similar solutions even when starting from different ancestors. Two-toed and three-toed sloths look alike, behave similarly, occupy the same forests, but they arrived at this lifestyle through separate paths, spanning 30 million years of independent evolution. Convergence at work. The tree-dwelling niche selects for certain traits regardless of which lineage fills it. For 20 million years, sloth sizes remained relatively stable. Small tree species stayed small, ground species varied from medium to large. Then something changed about 5 million years ago. Ground sloths began growing. Some lineages reached massive proportions. Megatherium and its relatives pushed the upper limits of land mammal size. Why? The exact reasons remain debated. Larger size offers protection from predators, also allows reaching higher vegetation that smaller herbivores can't access. In environments with limited carnivores, which South America had during much of sloth evolution, growing large carried fewer risks than usual. No need to stay small and fast if nothing hunts you effectively, but large size brings costs. Energy requirements increase, mobility decreases, reproduction slows. Larger animals produce fewer offspring over their lifetimes. These trade-offs usually prevent unlimited size increase. Something about Pleistocene South America made the trade-offs worth it for sloths. Then humans arrived. Around 15,000 years ago, people crossed into the Americas. They brought hunting technology developed over millennia in other continents: spears, traps, fire, cooperative hunting strategies. And they encountered animals that had never experienced human predation. Megatherium fossils show cut marks, evidence of butchery. Humans hunted these giants. At sites across South America, we find bones bearing stone tool marks, hearths with burned sloth remains, clear proof that humans killed and consumed these animals. How difficult was the hunting? We don't know. Megatherium was slow but powerful. A cornered individual could be deadly, but humans kept hunting them anyway. By 8,000 years ago, Megatherium was gone. So were most other giant ground sloths. The timing corresponds closely with human expansion through the Americas. Climate change was also happening. The end of the last ice age brought warmer temperatures, but many scientists suspect human hunting played the major role. These animals had survived previous climate shifts. Human arrival was the new variable. Not all ground sloths went extinct immediately. Some smaller species persisted longer. Island populations survived into relatively recent times. Caribbean ground sloths lived until just a few thousand years ago. But eventually all the large-bodied ground sloths disappeared. Only the small tree-dwelling species remained. Today's 6 sloth species represent what survived. They're not primitive relics unchanged since ancient times. They're highly specialized animals adapted for specific lifestyles. Their small size isn't a limitation, it's an optimization for tree life. They're exactly the right size for the niche they occupy. Still, looking at a modern sloth, knowing its ancestry, adds perspective. That 10-pound animal hanging peacefully from a branch descends from creatures that weighed 4 tons. The family shrunk dramatically, lost most of its diversity, went from over 100 species to 6, from occupying almost every habitat type to just tropical forests, from ground and tree dwellers to exclusively arboreal. The transformation was dramatic but not unique. Many mammal groups experienced similar bottlenecks. The megafauna extinctions that eliminated mammoths, mastodons, giant beavers, and countless other large species hit sloths particularly hard. But they survived, found refuge in trees, maintained their basic body plan, those long arms, curved claws, slow metabolism, while adapting it to a smaller scale. We don't know if giant ground sloths were slow like modern sloths. They might have moved faster. Their size allowed different movement patterns, but fossil trackways suggest deliberate, careful steps, not rushed, not panicked. They likely lived at a pace more moderate than modern sloths, but slower than most large mammals. The slowness might be ancient after all, a core feature of being a sloth regardless of size. The evolutionary story hasn't ended. Modern sloths continue adapting to their environments, continue facing pressures from predation, climate, habitat loss. They're not frozen in time, not living fossils, just animals doing what animals do, surviving as best they can with the traits they inherited from ancestors. Those ancestors happen to include giants, animals that would dwarf any land mammal alive today, except elephants, animals that shaped their ecosystems through sheer size and appetite. Now extinct. Gone except for bones and the small descendants hanging quietly in tropical canopies. Living reminders that families change. That dominance doesn't last forever. That survival sometimes means becoming smaller, quieter, less conspicuous. The sloths that remain followed that path, traded size for stealth, became masters of going unnoticed rather than being too large to threaten, and in doing so outlasted their giant relatives. Persistence through adaptation, survival through transformation. The sloth family continues, just in a very different form than what once roamed the Americas during those ancient times. Chapter 7. Morning light filters through canopy layers. Dappled patterns shift across bark and leaves. The forest wakes in gradual stages. Birds call, insects hum. Somewhere below, a stream murmurs over stones, and the sloth hanging from its usual branch registers almost none of this visually. The world the sloth sees is dim, blurred, almost entirely lacking the detail we take for granted. Those small eyes function but poorly, very poorly. The technical term for their condition is rod monochromacy, a genetic quirk inherited from ancestors who lived underground millions of years ago. Those burrowing animals needed eyes adapted for darkness, sensitive to faint light, able to detect movement in near-total blackness, but they didn't need color vision, didn't need sharp detail. Underground, those things serve no purpose. So over time, the genes responsible for building cone cells, the structures that detect color and fine detail, broke, stopped working. And because the animals survived fine without them, natural selection never repaired the damage. The broken genes passed from generation to generation, persisted as sloths eventually left their burrows and returned to surface life. Now sloths live in trees, surrounded by vibrant greens and browns and yellows, but they see none of it. Their world is rendered in blacks and whites and greys, a monochrome existence in a colorful environment, and even that limited vision only functions in dim light. Bright daylight overwhelms their rod-only eyes. They become effectively blind when sun shines directly on them. A mother sloth can't see her baby from 5 feet away. Researchers have documented this repeatedly. Place an infant on a branch just beyond arm's reach and watch the mother search. She turns her head, listens for calls, seems to look right at the baby without recognizing it. Only when the infant cries does she locate it through sound rather than sight. The distance is minimal, the visibility should be perfect. But vision simply doesn't provide the information she needs. Male sloths fighting over females demonstrate similar limitations. They take swings at each other from distances where most animals would still be sizing each other up. Missing completely. Striking branches instead of rivals. The aggression is real, the combat intent exists, but the targeting system fails because the visual system can't process the necessary spatial information accurately. This seems like a profound disadvantage. How does an animal survive in trees without seeing clearly? Falls become more likely. Predator detection becomes harder. Even basic navigation should present challenges. Yet sloths manage. They've managed for millions of years. The poor vision hasn't prevented them from thriving in their niche. The answer lies in compensation. When one sense fails, others strengthen. Sloths developed a phenomenal sense of smell. Their nostrils aren't large or obviously specialized, but the olfactory system processes scents with remarkable precision. They can identify individual trees by smell from considerable distances, can detect fresh leaves versus old leaves through chemical signatures, can locate other sloths in the canopy through scent markers left on branches. Smell becomes their primary navigation tool. They memorize their home range not through visual landmarks but through scent maps. This branch smells like the fig tree they favor. That section of forest carries the chemical signature of bark with good handholds. The air currents shift and bring information about what lies upwind. A complete sensory landscape built from molecules rather than photons. Touch matters enormously too, those long arms constantly reaching forward, testing branches before committing weight, feeling for stability, assessing thickness. The claws provide feedback about bark texture. The footpads sense vibration. Every movement involves gathering tactile data to supplement the minimal visual information It's slower than sight-based navigation, but it's reliable, methodical, well-suited to an animal that never rushes. Spatial memory fills the remaining gaps. Once a sloth learns a route, it remembers the exact sequence of branches, the safe crossing points, the locations where predators typically rest. This memory doesn't require constant visual reinforcement. It's stored as a sequence of movements and sensations. The sloth follows these mental maps automatically, adjusted by smell and touch when conditions change. Living in dim conditions helps. Sloths are most active during dawn and dusk when light levels drop. Their rod-heavy eyes function better in twilight than daylight. The forest canopy filters sunlight naturally, creating the perpetually shaded environment where their vision works best. They've selected habitat that matches their sensory limitations, not consciously, of course, but through generations of individuals who survived better in darker areas. The green tint from algae provides camouflage sloths can't actually see. They're unaware that their fur changed color, unaware that they blend into foliage. The adaptation works despite the animal having no visual perception of its effect. Predators hunting by sight miss the green shapes. The sloths benefit without understanding why. Evolution optimizing systems across sensory channels the individual never experiences. Some researchers wonder if sloths see anything at all in bright light. Not just poorly, actually nothing. Complete temporary blindness when exposed to direct sun. The rod cells simply stop functioning under intense illumination. This would explain why sloths prefer shade so strongly, why they rarely move during midday, why they seem to freeze when sunbeams break through canopy gaps, not resting, just waiting for the blindness to pass as clouds shift or leaves sway back into position. Hearing isn't much better. Those tiny ears buried in fur don't capture sound effectively. They can detect loud noises. Mother sloths hear their babies crying, but subtle sounds go unnoticed. The acoustic world remains mostly silent for them. This partly explains why they react so little to disturbances. A gun fired near a sloth's head produces minimal response, not because they're deaf. Just because sound arrives muffled, delayed, stripped of detail that would help identify its source or meaning. Yet somehow all these sensory limitations add up to functional perception. The sloth navigates complex three-dimensional space, finds food, avoids predators reasonably well, locates mates during breeding season. Every necessary behavior happens despite vision and hearing that would debilitate most mammals. The compensation is that complete, that effective. There's no frustration in this, no sense of loss. The sloth never knew sharp vision, never experienced the world with full sensory bandwidth. This limited perception is simply normal reality as it's always been experienced. And within those limits, life proceeds smoothly enough. Sometimes people project human concerns onto these animals, worry about their blindness, pity their poor hearing. But the sloth isn't suffering, isn't missing anything from its perspective. It has exactly the senses it needs for the lifestyle it lives. No more, no less. The evolutionary bargain worked, traded visual acuity for other advantages, accepted dim perception in exchange for energy savings that slow metabolism provides. At night, when the forest darkens completely, sloth vision actually improves relative to daytime. Those rod cells excel in low light. While diurnal animals struggle to see, sloths navigate almost normally. The playing field levels. Their disadvantage becomes less pronounced. This might be why some sloth activity increases after sunset. The sensory environment shifts in their favor. The world becomes slightly less opaque. During the day, they rely on stillness. Can't see approaching predators clearly. Can't track movement effectively, so they minimize their own movement. Become part of the static background. The poor vision that would make running dangerous becomes irrelevant when you never run. The strategy adapts completely to the limitation. Baby sloths learn the sensory landscape from their mothers. Not through explicit teaching, through months of clinging contact, the infant experiences the mother's navigation choices, feels which branches she selects, smells the scent markers she responds to, gradually builds its own mental map overlaid on hers. By the time independence arrives, the young sloth has internalized routes and methods that work despite limited vision. Sloths falling out of trees sometimes happens precisely because they can't see clearly. A branch looks stable from one angle, feels acceptable to touch, but visual assessment of weight-bearing capacity requires detail their eyes don't provide. Occasionally, this causes miscalculation. The sloth commits its weight to wood that can't support it. The branch breaks, the animal falls, their bodies can survive 100-foot drops. Good thing, because it happens regularly throughout their lives. The permanent smile on a sloth's face exists regardless of what it's seeing or experiencing. The facial structure creates that expression anatomically. It's not connected to emotion, not reflecting contentment with dim, blurry perception or anything else, just bone and muscle arrangement that happens to resemble human happiness. People interpret it as joy. The sloth itself registers no opinion on the matter. Colors exist in the forest. Flowers bloom red and orange. Fruits ripen in vivid yellows. Poisonous frogs warn predators with brilliant blue skin. But the sloth sees none of this, moves through a world of monochrome variation, and functions perfectly well without ever knowing what it's missing, never questioning why some surfaces taste different than others, despite looking identical in the grayscale vision they possess. The compensation mechanisms that allow survival with poor vision don't work perfectly. Males can't find females quickly. Mothers lose track of babies more easily than species with better sight. Response to novel threats is slower when you can't see the threat clearly. These costs exist, they're real, but they're not catastrophic. Sloth populations persist, reproduce successfully enough. The sensory limitations prove manageable within the ecological niche they occupy. Light fades. Evening approaches. The sloth continues hanging, its visual world unchanged by the transition from day to night. Both look similar in the muted perception those rod-only eyes provide. The forest around it transforms, colors shift from vibrant to subdued, but the sloth experiences this as slight variation in gray tones, nothing dramatic, nothing particularly noteworthy. Just another moment in an existence where vision rarely provides information worth paying attention to anyway. Chapter 8. The sloth hangs. Head tilted slightly, eyes half closed in perpetual drowsiness. Then without warning, the head swivels, smoothly, continuously, rotating past the point where most necks would stop. Past 90 degrees, past 180, the head keeps turning until it faces almost directly backward. 270 degrees of rotation, 3/4 of a full circle, all while the body remains completely still. This movement happens slowly, Everything the sloth does happens slowly, but the range itself is remarkable. Most mammals are locked at roughly 90 degrees of neck rotation. Turn your own head right now, see how far you can go before discomfort stops you. That's normal. That's the limit built into 7 cervical vertebrae, the standard number for nearly every mammal on Earth. Sloths have more. 3-toed sloths possess 8 or 9 neck vertebrae instead of 7. Those extra bones sit at the base of the neck, closest to the rib cage, and they change everything about how the head can move. Each additional vertebra adds flexibility, extends the range, allows angles that would snap ligaments in other animals. The head rotates, pauses, rotates back. The sloth scans its surroundings without shifting body position, without using energy to turn around. Just the head moving, gathering information from angles the eyes alone could never reach. Given how poor those eyes function, this extended viewing range becomes essential. Can't see clearly forward? Look sideways. Can't see sideways? Look backward. The flexibility compensates for the visual limitations, but calling them neck vertebrae isn't entirely accurate. The extra bones evolved from a different source. In sloth embryos, these vertebrae develop early. At the same time, ribcage vertebrae form, rather than when neck bones typically ossify. They're ribcage vertebrae that migrated forward, modified themselves, took on new roles while retaining their developmental timeline. This happened millions of years ago, long enough that the adaptation is now fundamental to sloth anatomy. The extra vertebrae aren't optional, aren't experimental. They're as established as the claws or the algae-filled fur. Every 3-toed sloth is born with this extended neck. Every generation inherits the same owl-like flexibility. 2-toed sloths are different. They have fewer neck bones than normal mammals, only 5 or 6 cervical vertebrae. Their rotation maxes out around 90 degrees. Still useful. Still more than many animals manage. But nowhere near the dramatic range their 3-toed relatives achieve. This difference reflects their separate evolutionary paths. 2 different solutions to similar problems. 2-toed sloths compensated in other ways. 3-toed sloths invested in extreme neck mobility. The head turns, slowly surveys branches to the left, then right, then behind. The sloth doesn't move its eyes much during this rotation. The eyes stay relatively fixed in their sockets. It's the skull that moves, the entire viewing platform swiveling to aim those poor quality eyes in new directions. Each position held briefly, long enough to gather whatever limited visual information those rod-only eyes can provide. Other tree-dwelling animals lack this flexibility. Monkeys turn their heads maybe 120 degrees. Squirrels achieve similar range. Even other arboreal mammals with excellent mobility don't approach 270 degrees. The sloth stands alone among tree dwellers. Only owls match this rotation capacity, and owls achieved it through completely different anatomical modifications. The evolutionary advantage seems obvious. Predators approach from any direction. Food grows on branches all around. Mates might call from unexpected angles. Being able to scan a near-complete circle without moving your body is valuable, especially when movement itself is expensive. When every shift of position burns calories you can barely afford to spend. But the true advantage might be subtler. Hanging motionless for hours, days, weeks. That's the sloth lifestyle. During all that stillness, the world continues happening. Branches sway, other animals pass, weather changes, threats develop, resources appear. The sloth needs to monitor all this without breaking its energy-conserving immobility. The flexible neck solves this problem. The body hangs absolutely still, indistinguishable from the branch it clings to, but the head can move, can track, can maintain awareness despite the body's frozen state. It's surveillance without motion, vigilance without cost, the perfect adaptation for an animal whose survival depends on not being noticed. The rotation happens in segments sometimes. Turn, pause, turn a bit more, pause again. Other times it flows continuously, one smooth arc from facing forward to facing back. The sloth seems to choose which approach to use based on something. We don't know what. Maybe urgency, maybe the degree of threat, maybe just random variation in how the nervous system activates those neck muscles. Watch the head rotate and you see how the shoulders stay perfectly aligned, how the body doesn't twist to accommodate the turn. The neck vertebrae handle everything, each bone shifting slightly. The cumulative effect of many small rotations producing one large movement, like gears in a mechanism, precise, controlled, remarkably smooth for an animal that usually moves with such deliberate awkwardness. At night, when the sloth is most active, this flexibility becomes particularly useful. Those rod-heavy eyes function better in darkness. The animal might actually see shapes clearly enough to navigate, but the visual field remains narrow, so the head swivels more frequently, checking angles, updating the mental map of which branches lead where, building situational awareness piece by piece through sequential viewing rather than panoramic sight. During the day, rotation slows. The animal rests more, moves less. The head settles into comfortable positions and stays there for hours. Why scan surroundings you can't see clearly anyway? Better to rely on smell and memory until twilight returns. The flexibility exists but goes unused during those long motionless periods when bright light blinds the rod-only eyes. Young sloths learn to use this rotation gradually. Newborns have the vertebrae but lack the muscle strength and coordination to achieve full range immediately. The head wobbles at first, turns partially. Over weeks, the control improves. The infant practices rotating while clinging to its mother, mimics her movements. By the time independence arrives, the young sloth can match adult flexibility. Some sloths seem to enjoy the sensation or appear to. They'll rotate their heads for no obvious reason, just turning, looking around, then returning to neutral position. Whether this brings any satisfaction, any feeling at all, remains unknown. We project enjoyment onto the behavior. The sloth itself offers no comment. The mechanical advantage of extra vertebrae comes with costs. More bones mean more complexity, more points where injury could occur, more structures requiring maintenance and energy. The spinal cord running through those vertebrae must accommodate the extreme flexing without damage. Nerves and blood vessels must stretch and compress without cutting off circulation or sensation. Evolution deemed these costs acceptable. The flexibility persisted, spread through entire populations, became fixed. Whatever disadvantages exist, and they must exist because nothing in biology comes free, they're outweighed by the surveillance benefits, by the ability to stay motionless while remaining aware. The head completes another rotation, returns to facing forward. The eyes close briefly, open again. The sloth hangs there in its usual stillness, but now we understand that stillness is monitored, that behind the drowsy appearance lies constant awareness maintained through periodic neck rotations. quiet scanning of the environment, gathering information without giving away position through larger body movements. This adaptation evolved once, spread through three-toed sloth populations over millions of years, became so fundamental that we can't imagine these animals without it. Yet two-toed sloths survive perfectly well with standard mammalian neck structure. The adaptation isn't necessary for sloth survival, just beneficial, an optimization rather than a requirement. The shadows lengthen, the day drifts toward evening. The sloth's head rotates one more time, checking angles as light fades, preparing for the slightly more active nighttime hours ahead. The movement is smooth, practiced, automatic, the same motion repeated countless times throughout the animal's life, a small gesture, barely noticeable, but carrying all the evolutionary weight of millions of years of selection pressure that shaped these extravertebrae into tools for survival in the slow-motion world the sloth inhabits. The head settles, faces forward again, the rotation complete, the surveillance done, and the hanging continues, the stillness resumes, another moment in the long, quiet existence of an animal built for watching without moving, for surviving through flexibility hidden within apparent rigidity, for living at the intersection of motion and motionlessness where that remarkable neck allows both states to exist simultaneously. Chapter 9. The branch holds the sloth, or the sloth holds the branch. The distinction blurs when you spend most of your existence suspended. Those curved claws hook over bark, lock into place. The grip requires no effort, no muscle tension. The tendons simply settle into their natural position, and the sloth hangs there. Hours pass, days sometimes, just hanging. 90% of life happens in this inverted state, eating upside down, sleeping upside down, grooming upside down, even mating happens while suspended from branches. The sloth's entire world exists in this position. Gravity pulls in the wrong direction, or what would be the wrong direction for most mammals. But for sloths, this is simply how life proceeds. Inside the body, organs have rearranged themselves. The liver doesn't press down on the lungs. The stomach doesn't crush the diaphragm. Special adhesions anchor everything in place. Fibrous connections that developed over millions of years. They attach organs to the rib cage, hold them secure despite gravity's constant pull downward. 7 to 13% energy savings from these attachments. Small numbers perhaps, but crucial when your entire energy budget runs on 150 calories daily. Breathing happens easily in this position. The lungs inflate, deflate, no effort required beyond the normal rhythm. The adhesions do their work silently, invisibly. The sloth experiences no discomfort, no sense of wrongness. This is normal. This is how bodies are supposed to function when you evolved specifically for inverted existence. The fur grows backward too, away from the belly rather than toward it. This guides rainwater down and off the body instead of letting it pool against the stomach. Practical adaptation for an animal that hangs through tropical downpours. The water sheets off, runs along the reversed hair pattern, drips from the highest points rather than soaking into the coat. Home range for a sloth is small, 3 to 5 hectares typically, that's 7 to 12 acres, a tiny territory compared to most tree-dwelling mammals. Monkeys might range across hundreds of acres. Squirrels cover substantial distances daily, but sloths, they stay close, move between the same few trees week after week, month after month, sometimes an entire lifetime spent within a 100-yard radius. The trees they choose become familiar, every branch memorized, every route between feeding spots established through repetition. That poor eyesight we discussed earlier. It matters less when you know your territory through touch and smell and spatial memory rather than vision. The sloth navigates familiar space easily despite seeing almost nothing clearly. Food grows within this small range, the preferred leaves, the right trees. Sloths are selective about what they eat despite consuming only leaves. Certain species, certain ages of growth, they return to the same feeding spots repeatedly. Patient harvesting of resources that regrow slowly, never stripping one tree completely, always leaving enough for regrowth. Time moves differently at this pace. A sloth might spend 3 days in one tree, just hanging there, eating occasionally, sleeping frequently, moving between branches when necessary, but never hurrying. Then a slow journey to the next tree. The crossing takes hours, careful placement of each limb, testing every handhold, finally arriving at the new location and settling in for another extended stay. Other animals pass through this territory constantly. Monkeys crash overhead, birds land and depart, insects swarm, but the sloth remains a constant presence, part of the landscape itself. Other species learn to ignore the hanging shape, not prey, not threat, just another feature of the forest like moss on bark or vines between branches. Sometimes sloths share trees, not deliberately, just coincidence. Two individuals who happen to choose the same canopy at the same time. They tolerate each other's presence. No territorial disputes, no aggression, just coexistence. One sloth on the northern side, another on the southern branches, both hanging, both eating, both utterly indifferent to the other's proximity. The home range centers on certain key trees, cecropia trees often, these fast-growing pioneers with hollow trunks and large leaves. The leaves aren't the most nutritious, but they're abundant, easy to reach, sufficient for survival when you need so few calories. A sloth might have 3 or 4 favorite cecropia trees, rotating between them, giving each time to produce new growth before returning. Ground touches happen rarely. That weekly bathroom trip, occasional travel between disconnected tree clusters, but mostly, the forest floor exists as abstraction, a dangerous place glimpsed during descent, crossed as quickly as slowness allows, then forgotten during the return to canopy safety. The vertical space within each tree gets used fully. Low branches when temperature drops, higher branches when seeking sun, middle zones for sleeping. The sloth adjusts position based on temperature needs. That imperfect thermoregulation we mentioned requires active management. Sunbathing to warm up, seeking shade to cool down, moving through three-dimensional space vertically rather than horizontally. Upside down, sleeping looks uncomfortable to us. The head hangs down, arms and legs draped over branches, but those specialized tendons lock everything in place. The sloth can relax completely, enter deep sleep, never worry about falling. The grip maintains itself unconsciously. Even death doesn't release it sometimes. Deceased sloths found still hanging, still locked in that final grip position. Movement between branches happens slowly, always slowly, but also carefully. Each transition tested, weight shifted gradually. The claws released from one branch only after securing grip on the next. No leaping, no fast scrambling, just deliberate progression from point to point. Safe, reliable, predictable. Weather changes the experience without changing the behavior. Rain falls. The sloth hangs there wet, Wind sways the trees, the sloth sways with them. Lightning might flash nearby. Thunder rolls across the canopy. Still the sloth hangs, unmoved by meteorological drama, waiting for conditions to improve or simply accepting them as temporary states to endure. The home range rarely expands. Young sloths inherit territory from mothers, settle into adjacent areas, establish their own small domains. These territories might overlap slightly, might share certain trees, but each sloth maintains its core area, its familiar zone, the few trees it knows intimately and returns to constantly. Years pass, the same branches, the same roots, the same daily patterns are hanging and feeding and sleeping. Novelty arrives slowly, if at all. The reliable rhythm of existence in a small space. This tree today, that tree tomorrow, the other tree next week, then back to the first tree. The cycle continues. Quiet, predictable, sufficient, life inverted, life in miniature territories, life spent hanging rather than standing. This is the sloth's reality, not a limitation, not a compromise, just the way existence unfolds when you evolved for minimal movement in small spaces, when energy conservation trumps exploration, when familiarity provides all the security and resources survival requires. The branch holds, the claws grip, the body hangs suspended, and another day passes in the slow rhythm that defines these animals completely. Chapter 10. The sloth reaches toward a cluster of leaves. The movement takes time. The arm extends gradually, joints flex at a pace barely perceptible. Finally, the claw hooks a branch, pulls it closer. The mouth opens, closes around a single leaf, begins chewing. Chewing continues. The jaw moves up and down, slowly, rhythmically, like a meditation. Each bite processed thoroughly before swallowing. The leaf is tough, fibrous, full of cellulose that most mammals cannot digest. But the sloth has time, all the time in the world. The chewing continues, minutes pass, the same leaf still being worked, ground down gradually by those peg-like teeth. Leaves make up nearly everything the sloth eats. Green, brown, sometimes young and tender, sometimes old and leathery. The nutritional value is low, very low, a handful of calories per leaf at most. Other animals avoid this diet, choose fruits instead, seeds, insects, anything with more concentrated energy. But sloths commit fully to leaves, have committed for millions of years. The body adapted completely to extracting what little nutrition these plants provide. The leaf finally breaks down enough to swallow. It travels down the throat, through the specialized esophagus that works upside down. Gravity should pull food back out, but special adaptations keep it moving in the right direction. The esophagus loops. Muscles work harder than in other mammals, push the food along despite the inverted body position. Eventually, the masticated leaf reaches the stomach. The stomach is enormous. 4 chambers, like a cow's stomach, compartments filled with bacteria, microorganisms that break down plant matter the sloth's own enzymes cannot process. These bacteria work slowly, very slowly, taking days to convert cellulose into sugars the body can absorb. The process generates minimal heat, almost no energy expenditure, just patient chemical breakdown happening at bacterial pace. More leaves enter the stomach, join the partially digested material already there. The stomach fills, gradually, over days and weeks. At any given time, the stomach contents represent up to 37% of the sloth's total body weight. Imagine carrying around that much undigested food constantly. The weight alone would be debilitating for most animals. But the sloth's organ attachments distribute the load, prevent the heavy stomach from crushing lungs or restricting movement. Digestion takes a month sometimes, 30 days for a single meal to travel completely through the system. This is extraordinarily slow, even by sloth standards. The bacteria work at their own pace, cannot be rushed. The sloth simply waits, continues eating new leaves while old ones process. The stomach never fully empties, always contains food at various stages of breakdown. The energy released from this digestion is minimal. Those 100 to 150 calories daily we mentioned earlier, that's the total output, less than a candy bar, less than most humans consume at breakfast. The sloth's entire daily energy budget fits into what we'd consider a snack. And it takes a month of constant digestion to generate even that small amount. Temperature affects the process. When body temperature drops too low, the bacteria slow down. Stop working entirely if conditions get cold enough. The food just sits there, undigested, taking up space but providing no energy. The sloth can starve with a full stomach if temperatures remain low for extended periods. This is why they need warm climates, why they bask in sun when possible. Maintaining bacterial activity requires warmth. The chewing continues. Another leaf, selected, pulled to the mouth, the same slow mastication. This is how feeding happens, one leaf at a time, processed thoroughly, no rushing, no multitasking, just deliberate consumption of low-quality food that takes forever to break down into usable energy. Water comes from the leaves themselves. Sloths rarely drink. The moisture in fresh vegetation provides enough liquid for their needs. Those leaves are perhaps 60 or 70% water. Chew enough of them and hydration happens automatically. No trips to streams, no descending to ground level for water sources. Everything needed exists in the canopy leaves. The selective nature of leaf choice matters. Not all leaves are equally digestible. Some contain more toxins, more defensive compounds that plants produce to discourage herbivores. Sloths learn which trees produce the best leaves, which species are safest, which age of leaf offers optimal nutrition to toxin ratio. This knowledge gets built through experience, trial and error over months and years. Young sloths learn food preferences from mothers. The infant tastes whatever the mother eats, develops preference for those same tree species. Later in life, the young sloth seeks out similar leaves, maintains the dietary tradition passed down through generations. This creates consistency. Each sloth in an area eating from similar trees because that's what their mothers taught them. The bacteria in the stomach are specialized too, species specific. A three-toed sloth's gut bacteria differ from two-toed sloth bacteria. They've co-evolved, adapted to break down the particular leaves that species prefers. Transfer bacteria between species and digestion fails. The wrong bacteria can't handle the wrong leaves. The system is that finely tuned, that specialized. Eating occupies hours daily, not continuous eating, just periodic feeding spread across waking time. A few leaves here, rest. A few more leaves there, sleep, then more feeding. The pattern continues throughout the day and night. Fuel intake happens gradually, matched to the slow energy release from digestion. The teeth never stop growing. They're rootless, continuously growing throughout life like rodent teeth. The constant chewing wears them down. Growth and wear balance each other. If a sloth stopped eating, the teeth would grow. Too long? Interfere with jaw closure. But sloths never stop eating long enough for this to become a problem. The wearing and growing reach equilibrium. Those teeth lack enamel, just dentin, the softer inner layer of normal teeth. This makes them more vulnerable to damage, but also means they wear down easily. Maintain the right length through use. The trade-off works because leaves don't require sharp, cutting edges, just grinding surfaces. Dentin provides enough hardness for that purpose. Tannins from the leaves stain the teeth black, dark compounds that accumulate over time. An old sloth has completely blackened teeth from years of leaf consumption. This doesn't indicate disease, doesn't cause problems, it's cosmetic darkening from dietary chemicals absorbed into dentin. The teeth work fine despite the staining. The digestive system produces gas. All that bacterial fermentation generates methane, lots of it. But sloths rarely pass gas. The methane gets absorbed into the bloodstream instead, travels through the body, eventually exhaled through the lungs. This prevents the bloating that would occur if gas accumulated in the gut, keeps the stomach from expanding beyond its already enormous size. Energy availability limits everything. With so few calories coming in, every expenditure must be justified. Moving costs energy, fighting costs energy, even thinking costs energy. The sloth minimizes all of it, moves only when necessary, avoids confrontation completely, relies on simple behavioral patterns that require minimal cognitive processing. The entire lifestyle designed around matching output to extremely limited input. The feeding continues day after day, week after week, month after month. The same trees, the same leaves, the same slow chewing and even slower digestion. Nothing changes, nothing needs to change. The system works, has worked for millions of years, will continue working as long as the forest provides leaves and the bacteria keep processing them into usable energy. Sometimes a sloth eats the same leaf type for days, just that one species, one particular tree, then switches to a different species, spends time on different leaves. The variation might provide different nutrients, balance out toxin exposure, or it might be random, we don't know. The sloths aren't telling us their reasoning. The stomach churns slowly, contents mixing, bacteria spreading through plant material, chemical bonds breaking, complex molecules becoming simpler, sugars releasing. Gradually, so gradually, the energy trickles out over days rather than hours. No sudden spikes, no crashes, just steady minimal release matched to steady minimal needs. Other tree-dwelling herbivores make different choices. Howler monkeys eat some leaves but supplement with fruits. Colobus monkeys have similar multi-chambered stomachs but process food faster. Only sloths commit this completely to the slowest possible digestive strategy. Only sloths build their entire existence around minimal energy extraction from minimal quality food. The trade-off enables survival on resources other animals ignore. Those leaves stay on trees because nothing else wants them. Too low quality, too toxic, too difficult to digest. The sloths face no competition, have the food source entirely to themselves. This ecological niche remains open, available, sufficient for small populations living slowly in small territories. The sun moves across the sky. The sloth continues hanging, continues chewing, another leaf consumed, another small contribution to the stomach's contents, another tiny addition to the 30-day processing queue. The bacteria continue their work. The slow breakdown continues. Energy releases in amounts almost too small to measure. but sufficient, just barely sufficient, which is all that's needed when you're a creature designed around sufficiency rather than abundance. The leaf diet limits reproduction. Females can only produce one offspring every 15 months, sometimes longer. The energy budget doesn't support faster reproduction. Pregnancy takes energy, milk production takes energy, infant care takes energy. The mother must accumulate enough resources to support both herself and a developing baby. This takes time when calories arrive so slowly. But it works. Populations persist, babies grow, reach maturity, reproduce themselves. The cycle continues despite every limitation. The leaf diet imposes slow growth, slow reproduction, slow everything, yet sustainable, viable, successful in the evolutionary sense that matters. Enough offspring survive to maintain population numbers across generations. The chewing slows, stops. The sloth's eyes close. Sleep arrives. The partially chewed leaves remain in the stomach. The bacteria continue working. Digestion doesn't stop during sleep, doesn't pause, just continues at its eternal, slow pace, breaking down, converting, releasing, the process that defines these animals as much as their slowness, or their claws, or their inverted hanging. Energy from leaves, extracted slowly, used sparingly, sufficient for a life lived at minimal speed in minimal space. The equation balances, input matches output, nothing wasted, nothing excessive, just enough, always just enough. And that sufficiency allows life to continue, hanging, chewing, digesting, existing in the slow rhythm that leaf eating imposes, the rhythm that shaped these animals completely, the rhythm that continues unchanging in the quiet canopy spaces where sloths spend their entire lives processing leaves into just barely enough energy to process more leaves tomorrow. The branch holds, the stomach churns, the bacteria work, and another day passes in the timeless cycle of consumption and digestion that sustains the slowest lifestyle on Earth. The forest settles into evening. Light fades through layers of leaves. Somewhere in the canopy, a sloth hangs from its branch, eyes closing, breathing slowing. The same rhythm it has followed for hours, for days, for its entire existence. We've traveled through the sloth's world, watched it move through water 3 times faster than on land, seen it rotate its head in impossible angles, followed it down to the forest floor for that weekly ritual, observed the garden growing in its fur, the leaves processing slowly in that enormous stomach. The life lived almost entirely upside down in a space no larger than a few acres. But now, as darkness comes, all that knowledge fades into something simpler. The sloth just hangs there, breathing, being, existing in the quiet way it has always existed. No urgency, no struggle, just presence in the canopy as the world grows dark around it. The rain begins, gentle drops at first, then steady. The sloth doesn't move. Water runs along its fur, follows those backward-growing hairs, drips from the lowest points. The animal remains patient, accepting. Rain is just another condition, another moment in the endless succession of moments that make up its days. Other animals settle too, birds tucking heads under wings, monkeys curling together in family groups, the forest preparing for night. But the sloth's preparation is minimal. It was already still, already quiet, already halfway to sleep even during waking hours. The transition happens without announcement. Eyes close, breathing deepens slightly. Sleep arrives like mist, gradual, inevitable, natural. The branch sways gently in wind. The sloth sways with it. No resistance, no tension, just movement accepted, incorporated. the animal and its perch moving together as one. This is how it spends most of life, connected to the tree so completely that separation becomes meaningless. The sloth is part of the forest is part of the sloth. The boundaries blur in the darkness. Time passes, minutes, hours, it doesn't matter. The sloth sleeps. Digestion continues in the stomach, bacteria working through their 30-day process, heart beating slowly, perhaps 40 times per minute, perhaps fewer, the body conserving, always conserving, energy held close, used sparingly, nothing wasted in the quiet darkness. Tomorrow will bring the same rhythms, the same branches, the same leaves, the same slow chewing and slower digestion, but tomorrow exists somewhere distant, unreachable. Only now matters, this moment, this breath, this perfect stillness in the rain-soaked canopy. The sloth hangs, the forest breathes, the night deepens, and in that darkness, in that quietness, in that absolute absence of hurry or worry or movement, we find something we'd forgotten. The possibility of simply being, of existing without purpose or plan, of hanging suspended while the world turns and time passes and nothing demands our attention. The sloth knows this, has always known this, will continue knowing this long after we've moved on to faster things. It hangs there still, breathing slowly, eyes closed, lost in the timeless rhythm of existence at its most essential, most peaceful, most complete. The rain continues, the branch holds, the breathing slows further, and the sloth sleeps.